It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM. Our conversation with Tom Clavin is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And here we are, riding the dusty trails of the West again. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful. And it's good to talk with you again about your new book, Tombstone, the Erb Brothers, Doc Holliday, and the vendetta ride from that bad place that we're not allowed to go to.
That four-letter word.
Yeah, that four-letter word. This is a wonderful read, and what a great culmination to what has become a trilogy of books that you've written. And we've had you for the first two, so why not now?
Might as well complete the trilogy. I mean, that was a big part of my motivation to do Tombstone, in that, you know, really with Wild Bill, who became the first kind of prototype of the frontier lawman after the Civil War, sort of the lone gunman that could outdraw the bad guys. And then you got into Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson in Dodge City, where they were starting to really believe the peace and peace officer. And let's not tame a town by out killing the bad guys. Let's find ways to actually do some effective policing. And then you have in Tombstone a place where people were saying, okay, the Old West is gone, Wild West is gone. We're going to be a sophisticated city, the San Francisco of the Southwest. Yet suddenly you had this explosion of violence at the gunfight at the OK Corral. So with the Erb Brothers and Doc Holliday being the enforcers of law and order. So there was an arc to that trilogy, and Tombstone completes it.
And it's been told, the story of Tombstone has been told so many ways and in so many different formats, but never faithfully, it seems, because there are some really, really detailed accounts that you're able to provide and not only fill in some of the holes, but correct some of the gaps in what we know about this event. And so much of it has to do with the reputations of the Earps. We always think of them as the upstanding lawmen trying to clean it up, and sometimes that's, well, especially in its day and age, it's not the reputation that they enjoyed. Yeah,
I mean that's usually the storyline, that the Erb brothers were first of all the chief. You know, they were all marshals and sheriffs, and that really wasn't true. I mean, they came to Tombstone not to do lawing, as Wyatt called it. They came to get rich. You know, they that was their motivation. Mm-hmm. Yes, Virgil was the marshal of Tombstone, kind of reluctantly the marshal, because otherwise there wasn't much of an effective law enforcement presence there. But the other brothers, Morgan, Wyatt, Warren, James, I mean, there were 5 Erb brothers in Tombstone at the same time. Their idea was, why don't we invest in these silver mines and get a lot of money like other people are? And so it's true what you say. They were not the fine, upstanding citizens. I mean, they were basically good people. They were flawed. I mean, let's face it, Wyatt had spent some time in prison as a horse thief. But they were very reluctantly called upon, or felt themselves being called upon, to become deputized and to take on the forces of outlaws and lawlessness that were threatening to keep Tombstone as a Wild West town when it wanted to progress and become. It was looking ahead to the 20th century, and the cowboys and the corrupt branches wanted to stay firmly in the 1800s.
One of the interesting aspects of your new book, Tombstone, for me, was the fact that Virgil Earp really emerges as a really strong character in this book.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I really wanted to do with Tombstone is focus on the Erb brothers and that brotherhood and that relationship between the brothers, and which has sometimes been portrayed semi-accurately and sometimes not accurately at all. You look at a classic Western like John Ford's My Darling Clementine, where the whole structure of the brothers is completely upended. Whereas in my book, I wanted to show, yes, Virgil and his wife Allie, who's a very interesting character, mm-hmm. and their relationship, but such a strong one that lasted for many, many, many years, that Virgil could have easily just sat this one out and not gotten involved in a gunfight. In fact, the last thing he said before guns started blazing is, "I did not want this." He was trying to calm things down. But then, guns started firing, and he was right in the middle of things, and in fact got wounded during the gunfight at the OK Corral. So I think if one of the things people come out of reading the book is that Virgil Earp, as you say, is a really interesting character, then I've done my job the right way.
Yeah, you're very right about Allie, too. The women of the Earp family is a whole different sidelight that we don't really consider when we think about the story, but they have a very definite role, and Allie's right at the top of that list.
They did. I mean, the Erb brothers were not only there. This was not a frat house that they were operating in Tombstone. I mean, Virgil and his wife Allie, Wyatt and his wife Maddie, Morgan and his wife Louisa, and you had Doc and his well, I call him wife very loosely. Doc had his girlfriend Big Nose Kate, and they were frontier marriages, meaning that you basically declare you're man and wife, and you are. And which made divorces easier too, because you could declare you're not married anymore and you aren't. But yes, there was a subplot of the story is how the Earp wives were there with them in Tombstone, how they supported them in a way, but also were shunned by the Tombstone Society, who had a segment of Tombstone Society that saw itself as becoming more 20th century and sophisticated, and they thought that the so-called frontier marriages, which were commonplace, were scandalous. And they actually shut. I mean, the Earp women were not allowed to walk into downtown Tombstone. They were told, stay out of there. And I think that's an interesting aspect of the story. Tom
Clavin with us. The book is Tombstone, the Erb Brothers, Doc Holliday, and the vendetta ride from that bad place.
That bad place.
I see, I'm not allowed to say. I just can't bring myself to say it on the air. But Tom, let's get into the story of the gunfight at the OK Corral itself. It really seems like this thing was not only not destined to happen, but it was accidentally that this shooting occurred.
It was like a match was struck in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's when the gunfight has been portrayed on screen, it's usually portrayed as something that took minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. And people are running around and hiding behind buildings and behind water barrels and things like that, and shooting rifles and all this kind of stuff. And the actual gunfight at the OK Corral was remarkably different. It was 30 bullets were shot in 30 seconds. And it was not at the corral itself, but in a vacant lot that's kind of rather narrow. I mean, the combatants were only about 15 feet away from each other. So you're talking about an extremely intense firefight that went on just in 30 seconds that left 3 men dead and 3 more wounded. And that's what I think is another reason for doing the book at this point, is that gunfight has been so often not portrayed correctly. Let's see if what it really was, which is an enormously intense fight.
We meet so many of the interesting characters whose names we're so familiar with: Ike Clanton, the McClarys, of course, Doc Holliday, and the Erb brothers. The aftermath and the trial, you do us a great service in looking at the trial that came after the gunfight at the OK Corral. And we meet some other really, really interesting folks there, including it gives us an idea of how legal justice worked in that day and age, and how loose it was, and how it was really a fortunate thing if you had the right judge and the right attorney at the right time.
The legal system was loose at the time, but it was getting less loose, and I mean that in a good way, in that one of the reasons why the frontier towns wanted law and order and wanted to have places where they could build schools and build churches and raise families is that they wanted a justice system that was actually going to be a justice system, and that defendants had their rights and the prosecutors did their jobs. And I think what happened after the OK Corral is a good example of that. Basically, Wyatt and Doc were arrested and tried for murder. And it was a month of this trial that went on in front of Judge Wells Spicer until he finally gave his determination. And, if he had determined that Wyatt and Doc were indeed guilty and should be taken to Tucson, for example, and stand an actual murder trial, our American West history could be quite different. They could have been convicted and spend the rest of their lives in jail. Yeah. So portraying what happened in those weeks after the gunfight was very important, because Wyatt and Doc's lives continued to be in the balance.
All right, so we get to the vendetta ride, and the murder of Morgan Earp is what really is for me, the whole pivot point of the book. When Morgan Earp goes down, Wyatt Earp becomes a whole different person, and it's just an amazing and breathtakingly fast series of events that occurs.
It is. It's a very sad event because, after the gunfight, a lot of people thought, okay, well, that's done with, and now we can move on. And then you have Virgil getting ambushed and maimed for life. And then particularly sad is Wyatt and Morgan are shooting billiards, shooting pool, and Morgan gets shot in the back, ambushed and shot in the back, and dies on the pool table. that, like you say, that's a huge turning point for Wyatt in the story, because he was not by nature a violent man. He was not one of the feared gunfighters of the American West, as he's sometimes portrayed. But here he had one brother that was maimed, another brother again ambushed, who was actually killed. So so he and Doc Holliday, they share this look to each other like, okay, enough's enough, we got to ride. And so they grab another brother, Warren Earp, Doc, a few men, they form this posse, and they go on this vendetta ride to chase down the killers of Morgan and the ambushers of Virgil. And that's a very important part of the story, because the story of Tombstone and the gunfight at the OK Corral really doesn't end until that vendetta ride does.
I can tell you, you write it so well, too. You put us on horseback and take us along with the whole gang, and it's just an amazing ride. Couple of guys that I want to mention, because we're running out of time and I don't want to finish out without talking about them. First of all, Ike Clanton. Let's spend a little bit of time explaining to folks who he is and the role he plays here. But I really want to talk about Curly Bill and Curly Bill's final confrontation with Wyatt Earp, which is the stuff of legend.
Yeah, with Ike Clanton, he was kind of a loose cannon. He had a big problem with alcohol. He was a braggart. He was somebody that did a lot more talking than he did work. When his father was alive, he sort of kept Ike Clanton reined in, but his father dies that summer before the gunfight, and suddenly Ike is getting drunk, and he's going around Tombstone proclaiming to anybody who would listen how he was going to get rid of the Earps. So that was a big factor in what the catalyst for the gunfight at the OK Corral. When the fight actually happened, Ike was there with his brother Billy and the McLaury brothers, and Ike, when the bullets started flying, his feet did the talking. He took off. He saved his own life in that by escaping the gunfight. And Curly Bill was I guess you could say a psychopath. He was a psychopath with a gun and a Stetson or whatever the hat he wore. But yes, he was always getting in trouble, always getting out of trouble, right side of the law, wrong side of the law. But it was during the vendetta ride that he and Wyatt suddenly confronted each other. And the outcome of that was also a big part of why Wyatt Earp is a legend today.
Yeah. There are just so many wonderful stories and tremendous characters. Bat Masterson is back in this book. Johnny Behan is another character that, his story doesn't get as much mention, but he is so key to everything that happens here in this book, too.
Unfortunately, he's key, and the reason why I say unfortunately is he was the sheriff of Cochise County. If he had actually been a legitimate lawman and enforced the law, or even just made halfway measures, that gunfight would have happened, I think, and there would not have been bloodshed. But his lack of law enforcement was a big part of the story. Yeah, absolutely was. You have had such a great I have had such a great time reading your books. I guess that's the better way to put it. Tombstone, the Erb Brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Vendetta Ride from the Bad Place. Tom, it has been such a pleasure. What are you doing next? Are you done with these guys out west, or are there still more stories to tell? Well, there is another story that I'm not working on right now, but I'm under contract to, and it goes back in time a little bit in Texas. But actually, I'm working on a World War II story right now for my own next solo project is a World War II story. And my good friend Bob Drury, he and I have done several books together. Our next book, which we just turned into our publisher, is about Daniel Boone during the American Revolution. Oh, man. I can't wait. Well, you have to wait a little while longer. We'll let you know. You get those galleys to me right away, will you? I will, as soon as I can. Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being with us today. Oh, I thank you. Thank you. Thank you.